I question if sustainability really exists. The sustainability policies and governance and action of governments that we see, sustainability reporting has become a comic version of what it was originally conceived of, and sustainability assurance is mainly still incremental. So, from that perspective, the state that we are in now is limbo.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Bastard Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with global sustainability professionals in the corporate, government, nonprofit, academic space, talk about the challenges they're seeing, but more importantly, the work they're doing, how they came into the work, and how they measure their impact over the course of their career. With that, I'm extremely excited to have an old friend, Ralph Thurm, who's a founder of Ahead, co-founder of R 3.0 and managing director of Uncommons. He has been a leading professional in sustainable and regenerative innovation and strategy, operational sustainability and management, sustainable reporting, transformation and bioregionalism. And before becoming this serial entrepreneur in this space, he was really one of the pioneers of corporate sustainability through roles of the head of sustainability strategy at Siemens, the CFO, CEO of GRI, and director of sustainability and innovation at Deloitte. And with that, Ralph, it's really great to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
All right, so as a starting point, I'd love to hear a little about who you are and how did you come into this work to begin with?
For me, it all started in 1987 with the Brundtland Report, which I read. And I was lucky doing that because in 1988, I decided to study economics and do that in Germany. And when you wanted to study economics in Germany, you had to do microeconomics and macroeconomics. And this is a great benefit for my career and my understanding of economics, but also how to fold in sustainability into economics. So that's how it all started for me. And then I was working the first decade of my career at Siemens. You already mentioned that, where I was first looking at environmental topics and how could they be solved with economic solutions. And then later on was charged with developing a first sustainability strategy for the company. That bridged into working for GRI because during that time at Siemens, I was really looking for vocabulary. Because when you talk to people in 190 countries of this planet, you get like 250 different opinions of what sustainability is. So I needed structure, I needed vocabulary, and that was what GRI was giving us. And then when GRI institutionalized as a foundation in the Netherlands, I made the move, or I got the call to join them in the Netherlands and becoming their first CFO, COO, CIO. And during that time, I also actively helped develop or manage the development of two versions of the GRI guidelines, the G2 and G3. And then in 2008, I left to join Deloitte with the intention to really try out how would it be if they really understood sustainability and not just looking at it from an assurance portfolio perspective, but really embedded it in how much impact could it have with their clients, because they have a huge client base. And then in 2012, the Rio Plus 20 summit happened. And that was really mind-blowing for me because the outcome document was called The Future We Want. And some of us, we looked at each other and we said, isn't it the future we design? So should we no better focus on that? And that was really the birth moment for R 3.0, which stands for Redesign for Resilience and Regeneration.
Thinking back to those early days, what was the energy like back then? You talk about Rio Plus 20, you talk about the early days of GRI. Like, what was the movement like, and what were you hoping to build, or what impact did you think you could have through those early positions in the early days of the movement?
Having read the Brundtland report, where I was really struck by principles like intergenerational equity and intragenerational equity, and looking at economics, the microeconomics, and which had shortcomings already at that time, and the macroeconomics and the dysfunctioning between micro and macro needs. I was really convinced that we needed proper sustainability information. I remember this phrase, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So transparency could really make a huge difference. And it was transparency to change the economic system dynamics or to change the economic system logic per se, because already at that time, we saw that the current economic system, which we still have, creates a high level of unsustainability. So that was really the driving force to look at what sort of information is needed, how would it trigger necessary change, and how could we actually begin to design a different economic model. And that was really, yeah, for me, it was the driving force to be active in that sector.
Mm. So fast forward almost 20 years, 15 years. Where are we in comparison to what you thought needed to be done or would happen had we followed along that path?
Yeah, I will be quite drastic in my language. The first thing that I would say, I question if sustainability really exists. In all of the things that we're seeing right now, if you look at sustainability management in corporations and how that is organized and carried out, the whole sustainability consulting field, or it calls itself the sustainability consulting field, the sustainability policies and governance and action of governments that we see is actually failing the idea of sustainability. Sustainability reporting has become a comic version of what it was originally conceived of, and sustainability assurance is mainly still incremental. So from that perspective, the state that we are in now is limbo. And I, just a couple of years ago, I coined a term which was called ESG La La Land. Just simply because we all are stuck in certain performance measurements that compare our performance from this year to the performance of last year or the performance of the last couple of years or an industry average or in intensity figures. But none of that says anything about sustainability. It is just benchmarking and efficiency measurement. Maybe I can also describe it just simply through the normal design of an indicator. An indicator has a numerator and a denominator. Everything that happens in the so-called sustainability field, I would just simply call it ESG progress field, is that we're collecting data from the numerator, and due to the lack of a denominator against what are we going to measure our performance, it stays on the numerator level. And that has nothing to do with sustainability. It's necessary information, but it's not sufficient. And that's the biggest deficiency that I'm seeing, and where there is an extreme level of denial when you address it to those that really should do something about it.
So how did we get here? Like where did we go wrong as a movement? Where did things kind of fall off the tracks? Because I'm trying to figure this out because I really feel like if I look back 15 years, 20 years ago, yes, there were like 5 companies that we always talked about. They were like the ones that really made the transformation, had leaders that were really intent on over the course of 10, 20, 30, a generation, trying to make real change. But then I look out the window now, I'm like, well, you've got thousands of companies that are reporting that didn't before. So the floor has come up against like everybody. Is that progress or is that not enough? Like where are we going wrong?
It's the same thing what I said before. You need to know against what you're going to measure to have an idea of if there is real progress. I think you can divide it in a way that you say, yes, there has been progress in becoming less bad in what we do, or being less degenerative in what we do, without knowing when good is good enough. And that's the constant struggle that I have with the so-called sustainability field, that they say, oh, we became a bit more sustainable. That's a bullshit phrase. That's just a no-go, because how would you then know when you are sustainable? Well, you don't. So how can you say you became a bit more sustainable? West, I think the only thing that you can say is that you became a little bit less degenerative. But in order to become sustainable, you also need to look at the other side of the coin, the regenerative field. And that is where I'm not seeing the movement that became an industry, as you very rightly said, ever accepted the challenge to design a different economic system. What What's happening is that everything is squeezed into an existing economic system so that it doesn't have to change. And as an outcome, you see that everything is folded into the idea of a business case for sustainability, or that sustainability has to create enterprise value. And everybody is sort of like satisfied with that. I
Yeah.
am annoyed.
So, and I guess I'm just trying to figure like how we got here. Like, is it because we had the wrong people in the movement? Because now it's a job, it's a career, it's not necessarily driven by people trying to solve the problems, but really trying to solve a different problem. Like, where, what happened? Because I feel like if it's not being led by the environmentalists, it became more of a business, you know, HBR kind of thing. It became like a business case. Like, was that what failed us, or was that the hope that just didn't deliver?
Well, just look at the development of how the field evolved or started to take shape in corporations. After Rio, the first Rio conference, 1992, and then also after 2012, 20 years later, and there were conferences in between, the political field really wanted to engage the corporate world. So the idea of a sustainability department or a chief sustainability officer was born, but we didn't have the education for these people. So what happened is that the early 60s in the companies who had their career and had just a couple more years to go, they just got this job, and they tried to do something nice with it. Nothing spectacular. Starting to develop data, and everybody in the company was annoyed that they had to collect more data on a field where they didn't know anything about sustainability. And it was, a fight against windmills for that first generation of sustainability professionals to actually be able to say something.
So did that force them to kind of give up a bit of their artistry to just get into the room and to feel validated? Like, if it was like, did that become the snowball that just got bigger and bigger and no one stopped it? Or, because I'm just trying to feel like where we went wrong. Like, shouldn't we be kind of at the front of this, being like, hey, stop, this is not sustainability? But did that just, we just
Well,
set that
these
aside for too long?
these people had a job, and these people had to report to a board. And the board was normally saying, okay, what's the business case for that? Can we make money with this? Is that a strategic advantage of being in the forefront? And I think that most of us in the sustainability field know when you put your neck out, you have a first mover disadvantage. So, how do you deal with an economic system that fights sustainability, with the expectations of a board to make money with it? Well, you're going to reduce your agenda to incrementalism. And that's, I think, what really happened very often. And of course, the economic system with, shareholder value perspective and so on, not even the existence of a stakeholder perspective, which still today is not working, I would say, really gets you into that flow of, okay, I need to do my job, but I can't annoy my board. So I need to do something that looks nice. And that is where the low-hanging fruits were harvested. That was all fine for a couple of years. Less cost on waste, less cost on procurement, saving money in logistics, even money in production. And I've been in exactly that time, when I was at Siemens, where we saved money from that sustainability perspective, and that was good. But you know, moving forward and really trying to move the economic system design, that has never really happened.
Yeah, so I was going to ask like what your experience was, because I mean you were at the forefront of like three different places that were kind of setting standards and trying to push hard. But did you find yourself kind of even giving up a little bit? And what, like when you made the shift out, was it because you got tired of doing that? Like how did you personally do that?
Well, in the beginning, and having read Brundtland and have been educating myself, having read the documents from all these conferences and so on, went to many of these conferences, it was really clear that nobody in the company was ready for that. And you still had the expectation, oh, we might have 10 to 20 years to go. But then it must be like really done and tight. So you gave yourself some leeway during that time. Said, yeah, I need to educate these people. They need to see the business case. They need to see that they can save money with it, and they need to be excited about it. And that happened to a certain degree. But then you had a financial crisis in 2008 and other things, and suddenly other things became more important.
Now you're in the middle of the industry now. Where do you see the sustainability profession itself these days? Like, how are people feeling? Are they making progress? Do you think they're smarter than they used to be in terms of like the education in the boardroom? Like, where's the profession itself these days? And like, do you have hope that we can turn this, this cycle around?
Again, a rather radical answer. I think the situation is desolate. I think we're not even having a sustainability industry, as I said that before. When I talk to anybody in a boardroom and I ask them, so what's your contribution to intergenerational equity? They don't have a clue what I'm talking about, but have published like 10 sustainability reports. Or when I do presentations, I sometimes ask people to raise their hand if they have read the Brundtland report, which is sort of the Bible from 1987. There's hardly a hand going up. So what do we have? We have an awful lot of so-called sustainability experts that are ESG apparatchiks working in companies, doing their job, complying with standards that have the S word in them, but are not delivering on the S word, and just cocoon looking at the bigger picture. And you have the globalization lovers that work in supply chain bullshit. Honestly speaking, there will never, ever be a globalized, sustainable supply chain. Never, ever. But gazillions of so-called sustainability experts say the opposite and say, oh, I'm working for sustainable supply chains. This is another bullshit agenda. It's impossible. And you can address it, but people disappear, become quiet, cocoon, retract, just to continue to do what they always did.
Pivoting a little bit, you mentioned standards. What's the role of the standards bodies at this point in terms of like the problems that you see or the misdirection that's happening? Or because I recently took the CFA ESG, now sustainable investment certification. There's all kinds of standards that are out there. Do they make this easier for companies to understand what they need to do to be sustainable? Do they make it easier to hide? Do they make it more complicated for people to understand what it actually means? Like, where do you see the standards industry as a stakeholder in this conversation?
Again, I would question that there are sustainability standards. There are all sorts of technical incrementalism standards. There are sustainability reporting standards who are just ESG progress standards, not delivering on sustainability. And you can be so blunt to say we have standards that define how to become less bad in what you do. And then you have a whole other part of the industry, the rankers, the raters, the index providers, who would say who is best in class of those that say that they became less bad in what they do. That is what we have. And I say that and I say that with a bleeding heart, honestly, because when GRI G3 came out, and I have to say I was responsible for the principles work stream in G2 and G3, so in 2002 and 2006. The intention was to have principles upon which indicators could be built, so that we're not only having sort of like a tick box exercise of certain indicators that companies have to comply with. It was really giving sort of the boundaries of proper sustainability reporting. And I just remember how much we fought for sort of 4 principles that define reporting content. The first one was sustainability context, stakeholder inclusiveness, materiality, which I would rather love to have been called relevance, but it was closer to the financial sector and these people needed to be attracted, so it was materiality. and completeness. And the definitions were crystal clear in 2002, but also in 2006, where it says if you're not measuring your performance against what we would call today thresholds and allocations, or carrying and carrying capacities, you're not reporting on sustainability. You're just reporting on ESG progress. Those definitions were out there. It was very clear. And ever since, I would say since 2008, when I left GRI, and I also left GRI because of the lack of enforcement of the sustainability context principle, one of the reasons, um, it went down the drain. It's a it's the best ever materiality definition that you can think of. And ever since, it has been completely screwed up, denied, not enforced. And if you look at the sustainability context principle in today's GRI guidelines, it's a laughing stock. It has nothing to do anymore. It misses words like performance, it misses words like allocations, and it is a totally ridiculous definition of sustainability context. If you look at what we lost since 2006, it's incredible. Everything was there. We just needed to do it.
Are we that far off, or were we that far off? We developed all this thinking we could be further along than we are now. Is doing less bad the critical step in getting to regeneration? And have we even got to that yet? Or has everything really been kind of washed away a little bit?
First of all, yes, it was okay in the beginning to start just with the numeration side of things because you really wanted to have lots of organizations to start reporting. And you also wanted to have investors and financial market players attracted by that information. Yes, we could have stepped over after a couple of years, and the GRI board could have enforced the sustainability context principle. The research should have been done during that time. Okay, so how do you measure those carrying capacities on the social side? And with that in tandem, you could have evolved and emerged and become better and really start to develop that into authentic sustainability. But that step never happened and still doesn't happen. And even the standard setters are now uh, in in violent denial of accepting that as a challenge.
I've been teaching in business schools, I've been in front of boards, I've been doing all this work, and I came to the realization really early on, like, we will find the balance, but only after through significant pain. And, like I was talking with, and, I'm in Southeast Asia a lot. So 4 degrees, 6 degrees Celsius on average in the big cities, that's not uncommon anymore. Like above historic standards. You see in the last couple of weeks, Hong Kong's had black rain events twice. Ho Chi Minh was underwater. Bangkok was underwater. And I think like this became the thing, like I realized like that in many ways, I don't think that what I was working on, even if I was working with great intentional companies, even if like Walmart got it all together, they were not going to solve this problem. And that I think allowed them to kind of slide back and say, well, then it's not our responsibility. Once kind of like the cool factor fell off. Like I think early on, a lot of companies start off with good intentions and then they realize it's a lot of work that there's no reward for. So they're going to pull that. And then there's no external catalyst. And so I feel like early on, I felt like we need to kind of what you said, like, prevent as much pain as possible. But now I'm almost thinking like when we get into resilience and we get into regeneration, like you have to accept that that's loss. And now you have to build for the next generation of rebuild, whatever that might be. And then maybe that's where we can kind of find a different balance, or we find different economic models, or like I'm not sure where that goes. And then the second thing I come back to is we didn't even mention your bioresilience, kind of framework, but what I see is that the global movement itself is losing, let's just say, it's losing its attraction to many in the regions. When I'm in Asia now, when I'm traveling around these countries, like they've already got like the framework, the polar bears, the carbon, like they know this big, but they got to solve for local issues. Well, because this 6 degrees Celsius, because of the acidification of their ocean and, encroachment of ocean into the rivers. Like they have real problems to solve that they didn't have 25 years ago, that they now have the resources to solve. And so I feel like even if like the global movement level, we're seeing like this, what's our relevance, what's been our impact, what's been our value. At the local level, when I look there, actually I'm seeing a bigger head of steam now, and they solve for real problems that are in their backyard. So the reward for solving them is immediate, or at least visible, or at least, closer to them than if, say, Paul Pullman had theoretically changed the coffee supply chain of Vietnam. Like, I feel like that in itself, maybe it's separate from our conversation earlier, maybe it's the next step of, I feel like that's something that I just keep going back to, saying, it actually, yeah, like the early artistic days of this movement haven't been fully realized, but actually it's morphed in some ways to the better recently, in my view. But then, yeah, like what happened with all these people at the global ESG level? Do they have relevance once this local, let's just say, redefinition, alignment to their own economy, their own capacity, but when all that's there, what's the relevance of the global people anymore? And I feel like that's actually the more interesting one from a career perspective. It's like they're less relevant than ever.
And if you think about what a potential future would look like, it's very much like Ilya Prigogine says, and he's a Nobel laureate. He said, in an age of turbulence, islands of coherence is the only thing that can happen that can turn a whole system around, because you never need like 20, 30, 40% of all humans for that turnaround. It needs just a couple of percent. And that is where we at our 3.0 also made a major strategic move to go away from collapse avoidance and into collapse resilience. And our business is now completely reorganized around what is it that we can do as our 3.0 to create collapse resilience. But what it also means is that there are certain things that you first need to let go of before you have any chance to understand what the magnitude of the urgency is. And I'm just going to mention a couple, like globalization is a failed concept. It can never be sustainable, like I said before, even if it's certified or validated or whatever. There is no global sustainable supply chain. Then what I said before, the concept of enterprise value creation is a failed concept. What we need is system value creation. And that needs proper measurement of, are you not creating financial value on the back of other capitals? And if you can prove that, you might create system value. In an age of commoning, we're asked to manage the commons, is a failed concept, while our whole system, economic system, is built around the idea of ownership. It constitutes this economic system design, but it's a failed concept in an age of commoning. Or the idea of nation-state boundaries. That is an artificial construct of us humans and has nothing to do with the way how nature organizes its bioregions. And that's already a very important word, bioregions. We can talk more about that. And just basically the idea that there is material growth that is perpetuating in a closed system is a completely failed concept. It just does not work. And still the majority of people, even in the sustainability field, talk about growth. And that is because they're asked to present a return on investment on sustainability. And the reason that we have that plea for growth is because, generally speaking, all of our systems like pension, like healthcare, like social security are bankrupt. And those are some of the harsh things that you need to just simply accept before you rethink, okay, how can you then create bioregional resilience and create these islands of coherence, knowing that climate change will continue. So we're biting ourselves in the ass on that side. But then also we're biting ourselves in the ass of the buffer capacity side by killing biodiversity, or through ocean acidification. So all of these planetary boundaries that play a role in here. So we're killing from two sides, and the result of that is displacement. So when you're designing resilient structures in these islands of coherence, you also need to already think about what happens if you have the double amount of people because of displacement, and how can you get them into proper jobs or proper affiliations or use of their capacity and still be in balance with the carrying and caring capacities are in these islands of coherence.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth with some of this in the sense of like, the last 50 years has just been this unabated economic growth. Well, 60, 70 years, unabated economic growth, expansion of the middle class, globalization the last 35 years has been like just this huge shift. But a lot of those trends were already, from a macroeconomic perspective, becoming unaffordable anyway. So now you're starting to see like this shift back regionally. And what I find interesting is that, when I think about like the tech change, culture change, industrial shift, demographic shift, value shift, like all these things are happening. Now's a really good time to be redefining things. And I'm not saying that capitalism is evil or it's the wrong tool or it's the wrong, like, or that something else is better. Like, but I think we're going to find out through this constant ebb and flow. And as localization, regionalization, bioregionalism becomes more prominent to globalization, actually that balance will more favor some of the core principles that we talked about 20 years ago that we need to. And that will allow everything from, let's just say, justice locally more easily enacted instead of waiting for some global group to do it. Like locally, they're going to have to take care of that. And they're more likely to because it's a real problem for them. I also think a lot of this is going to start to pull back because as we move into AI world and we have, our demographics are shifting more towards, we've already maybe had population peak. It's going to get easier as we start to slide down a little bit to really make some progress, I think, against some of these really destructive practices. Um, particularly in the West, I think like we're already seeing some of that. In China, you're seeing some of that, but it's also going to it's going to alleviate a lot of pressure on these countries to really continue, tearing down forests for something else. And so in a sense, like I'm just gonna, like if I'm looking out 20, 50 years, there's things that give me some hope, and there's things that like we're on a path. Some days we're on the right one, some days we're not sure where we're at, but it's like we need to like keep going, right? And like keep working at it, even if it's not with say the old systems. Like my work with corporates has really come down in part because I realized like you just can't have the impact that you thought you could. Like there's the allure of changing an entire supply chain and how it uses plastic and how it brings plastic back in. And I've worked on those projects and they're phenomenal. Like you learn so much, but at the same time, you're right. Like you're not changing the beast, but working with entrepreneurs who are at the local level trying to execute on these problems, environmental, social, community, whatever, like there's a lot of progress being made there in part because the future of jobs for them is really uncertain. So entrepreneurialism and innovation, it's meeting real problems and we're starting to see real progress there. So I don't know, like, I kind of oscillate back and forth. I really wish that as an industry, we'd made more progress and pat ourselves a lot less on the back. Like, and we really have. We take a lot of victory laps.
If I look at my own journey in this, I'm not an unhappy person. I am a person that has found peace with some of the things that will happen because we now know that they will happen. The data just tell us that they will happen. And what we've seen now, there are more than 2,000 bioregional learning centers on this planet, in more or less every country of this planet. There are people on the ground working on that, and people in communities working on that. But that has never been realized just because it was completely bulldozed by the globalization movement and the economic system greed and all of that. But it does exist. And what we're doing, for example, with our 3.0 is to use our capacity and our reputation in order to bring things from the local to the regional, to the continental, and to the global level. And that is, we call this weaving, because all of those people that work in these fields are normally not financed. They do this for because of passion. Some of them get certain subsidies, but this is all a completely underfinanced world. They concentrated on what's happening on the ground, and for all the right reasons, because this is the only thing that they were able to do. And now we are seeing the need to notch that up various levels, up to the global level, but from the bottom up. And that weaving is now starting to happen. We do that through convenings, conferences and confluences and dialogues that we hold. We do that in a major research project around knowledge commons. How do you make all that knowledge available for everybody, unfenced? And what sort of levels of governance or self-governance are needed for these different levels of the bioregional movement to function and to be a counter model and also an economic counter model to the existing economic system design. And seeing that bubble up and people become more connected, there's more community building, there's a community of inquiry and practice around knowledge commons, same around governance. We work with some of the I don't know, Ostrom related outfits that are dealing with governance aspects. So we're seeing this sort of parallel world, if you want, already emerging, and it's purely exploding at this moment. And still, it's not recognized by the old world. But I have my peace with that because they will disappear in collapse. I personally think that none of these standard setters that we're talking about right now will exist in 20 years. They're not going to be financed anymore. Companies will disappear. 70% of the Future 500 will not exist in 20 years anymore. So, yeah, you see the dissolving of the old world while the new world is already taking more and more shape. And I live right in between, and I see it starting to prosper, and that what really gives me hope. And that's what my own resilience is benefiting from.
Taking that idea that you got the old and new world, if you're to draw a really hard line between the two, and you said like we can only go new world from now, what are a few things that you'd bring over from the old world into the new world that would make it a little bit easier to make some progress?
Um, Continue to collect data around ESG, but do the rest of the homework. And it might not be of that relevance anymore in corporates, but every bioregion wants to know if they are successful or not. And they will need that information for their own bioregional unit of measurement. They will also need to find out how to best sort of have membranes with the nearest bioregions. Those are where we can learn from the governance processes of the old world. And what else? Just simply, I think where technology really helps us is in bioregional mapping, so that you have a very good idea of where does a bioregion start and end, and where does it has its membranes to other bioregions, and how is that looking on maps. All bioregions are different. Not all bioregions can do the same thing because just of geological and also cultural aspects to a certain degree. So, but if you need something, from a healthcare perspective, for example, and you can't produce that yourself, where is the nearest bioregion you can get that from? So that you avoid footprint and that you increase handprint. The very simple, true sustainability, authentic sustainability principles from the old world still live in the new world because they're generically true and they will survive. Also, the idea of inter and intergenerational equity will survive. Some technology will survive to a certain degree if it can really be used on global scales, with satellites around above in the sky. Yeah, we need those systems, and but we're not going to be having enough metals and minerals for having renewables all over the planet. So there's also those early idea of sufficiency and substitutability and non-commensurability, which are true sustainability principles. They will continue. And yeah, so there's a lot that we can carry over from the past, but really apply it for the right motives and for the right units of measurement.
Which brings me to the last question, which is if you're talking to young professionals who are really trying to break through, they see the same problems you do, they're trying to punch through this and create a real change. What are 2 or 3 tips you'd give them as they're coming up in their career or they're looking at this space thinking, I got to make my mark?
Yeah, well, I think it all starts with embracing the idea of bioregionality or bioregionalism. It needs them to engage locally and not think I need to have a global job or something like that. No, really focus locally, help others, really explore and feel bioregionalism because we have a huge illusion of separation from nature. So immerse yourself back into interbeing with nature. Find your nearest bioregional learning center, engage with them, um, oppose false narratives, I would say, and challenge incrementalism and live in community. I think those are the things that I foresee being having a certain level of well-being. Because isn't that still what we're looking for in sustainability?